led by the ITT Corporation. The ITT team is required to build, own, and operate a system that will provide nationwide ADS-B surveillance and broadcast services by as early as 2013. And earlier this month, the FAA published a notice of proposed rulemaking that would require aircraft operating in certain classes of airspace to equip with ADS-B out avionics by 2020. Over the last several months, the FAA has described ADS-B as the cornerstone and the backbone of NextGen and the future of our air traffic control system. I agree that ADS-B is a technology that holds enormous promise. It is potentially much more accurate than radar, which may help the FAA and airspace users utilize our airspace more efficiently. It can enhance safety by providing surveillance to areas that cannot be covered by radar and by granting pilots greater situational awareness. It may also enable the FAA to avoid hundreds of millions of dollars in costs by downsizing its ground-based infrastructure. That said, reasonable expectation must be set about what relief ADS-B can realistically provide for the type of meltdown and record-setting delays our system has faced this summer. Unfortunately, the American people have been led to believe that the silver bullet solution for the gridlock that we saw this summer is a new satellite-based surveillance system. The truth is, ADS-B will not provide significant tangible benefits for several years, and then only in conjunction with other next-gen technologies that are many years away from implementation now. It's time for the rhetoric to stop and for the administration to start explaining all of the ifs and whens about ADS-B and the next-gen system. Some have pointed out that ADS-B is a relatively mature technology that is not highly complex. We should not underestimate the technical challenges of building and integrating this new system into the NAS. As with any modernization program, there is clearly the potential for setbacks and slippage as far as implementation is concerned. In addition, even if the ITT team meets the FAA's ambitious schedule for deploying ground infrastructure and services, how quickly ADS-B can deliver major benefits will be determined largely by how quickly users equip. The FAA's proposed rule does not mandate ADS-B by users until the year 2020. Furthermore, some of ADS-B's most advanced applications and capabilities, like reduced separation in standards and aircraft self-separation, have received the most public attention. However, the FAA first needs to demonstrate that ADS-B performs as well as our current radar-based system before these capabilities can seriously be considered. Moreover, some of these advanced capabilities require ADS-B in avionics, which the FAA did not mandate in its proposed rule. Given that, the FAA has advertised ADS-B as the future of the air traffic control system, everyone should understand that the FAA has placed a tremendous amount of responsibility in the hands of the private sector. Instead of adopting a more traditional acquisition strategy for ADS-B, the FAA has opted for a service contract approach, whereby the ITT team will build the ADS-B ground stations and own and operate the equipment. The FAA will pay subscription charges for ADS-B broadcasts transmitted to aircraft and air traffic control facilities. The FAA has estimated that its contracting approach will save the government roughly $820 million over the next 30 years and cut about 5 years off of the deployment schedule. Regardless, I believe that there are inherent risks in this strategy. Both Congress and the FAA must provide vigorous oversight over this contract. With that, I again welcome all of our witnesses here today, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. Before I recognize the ranking member, Mr. Petri, for his opening statement or remarks, I ask unanimous consent to allow 2 weeks for all members to revise and extend their remarks and to permit the submission of additional statements and materials by members and witnesses. Without objection, so ordered. With that, the chair recognizes the distinguished ranking member, Mr. Petri, for an opening statement or his comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to join in welcoming our panels here today, and also thank you for scheduling this hearing. 2 months ago, as you pointed out, the FAA awarded the long-awaited ADS-B contract to the ITT Corporation, published a notice of proposed rulemaking on the system's ground station and equipage standards. These are two major milestones in the transition to a satellite-based surveillance air traffic control system, and I certainly would join in applauding all involved in the process. The new system will improve safety by increasing positioning accuracy, and according to our Federal Aviation Administration, it has great potential to increase our capacity to handle the potential threefold increase in traffic that's projected over the next 20 to 30 years. So we know the transition to the new system will not be simple. I'm glad we have the opportunity today to learn more about the contract itself, the contractor, ITT, and what role the new system will have in the effort to modernize our air traffic system. Strong oversight, both internally at the FAA and here in Congress, will be critical to the success of the transition. A lot is riding on a smooth and hopefully uneventful transition to the new system. I look forward to our witnesses identifying some of the major issues associated with the transition and the controls built into the contract to address those issues. Input from National Airspace System users will also clearly be very important. After all, what good is a new surveillance system if it fails to serve the user's needs? To that end, I look forward to hearing how the FAA plans to utilize technical experts from the aviation community as they move ahead with the implementation and transition to the ADS-B system. While I'm pleased with the Federal Aviation Administration's progress so far, we have a long way to go before we achieve full NextGen. I look forward to working with the aviation community as we continue to move toward that goal. This new system is the first tangible step in the process, and let's make sure that we get it right. I yield back.
Chair thanks the ranking member and recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Salazar, who is going to enter a statement into the record and make brief remarks.
Well, I do want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I just wanted to thank the FAA for their forward thinking. I just want you to understand that the state of Colorado is fully invested in the NextGen air system. I'm very concerned, however, about the air safety along the mountains in the ski country of Colorado. So just want to make sure that whatever we move forward or how we move forward, that we take into account the ski areas and the mountainous areas and Rocky Mountain areas in general of this great nation. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you allowing me to make a few comments.
I thank the gentleman, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I truly appreciate what you're doing here today. I think sometimes you worry about my level of enthusiasm about this project being too high, but for those of you in the audience that don't know, the chairman sees me coming, and we're going to be talking about ADS-B and how we need to have a different role here. The FAA's got a great product to sell, not another service to impose on folks. When we get through this, my friend Mr. Salazar is going to get his plane back, and he's going to make sure that he's got ADS-B in it because he doesn't want to live without it. It can be that good if all of the different components come together and make this thing work. And Mr. Scoville, glad to have you here today as the on-staff paid skeptic to make sure that we keep track of the things, managers and overseers that we need to do. I want to be sure that every component of aviation, whether it's AUPA, NATCA, Benny Capizzuto, the technicians, everybody sees, appreciates, and invests in a cooperative, collaborative way this system that can provide a tremendous boost in safety first, but in convenience and a whole host of other things. Don't be misled. This is not the answer to air traffic delays. It will help, but again, this is not the answer. But here, my enthusiasm comes from the fact that we have got something here that the flying public and the airlines need to be on board, fully invested as quickly as possible. Implementation is the key. There are 210,000 customers sitting out there waiting to be sold. If we give them a high-quality product at the lowest possible price, which competition ensures, then not at the end of the day, but at the beginning of the day, we're going to have something that will dramatically improve safety, convenience, and people will say, gosh, for once, the government got it right. Mr. Chairman, I got carried away. I yield back.
The Chair thanks the gentleman, and let me say that both Mr. Hayes and Mr. Salazar has talked to me frequently about ADS-B, and they have some very interesting ideas and are strong supporters of getting the program moving forward and getting to the point of implementation, and I appreciate that very much. The Chair will now introduce our witnesses in the order in which they are seated. Again, we welcome all of you here today. We've met in roundtable discussions with, I think, all of you in the past at more than once about ADS-B, and we are pleased to hear you here to have you here in the committee hearing. First, let me introduce Mr. Vincent Capizzuto, who is the Manager of Surveillance and Broadcast Service Program Office with the FAA. The Honorable Calvin Scoville, who is the, instead of paid skeptic, I have down here Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Transportation. Mr. John Kefalotis, who is the ADS-B Program Director, Defense with ITT Corporation, and Dr. Agam Sanam, who is the Senior Vice President and General Manager, Center for Advanced Aviation System Development with the MITRE Corporation, and Mr. Tom Brantley, who's the President of the Professional Airways System Specialist. Gentlemen, we welcome all of you here today, and as always, your full statement will be entered into the record. The Chair would ask you to summarize your statement in 5 minutes or less, and we'll give members the opportunity to ask questions. With that, the Chair now recognizes Mr. Capizzuto.
Thank you, Chairman Costello and Congressman Petri. At this point, I'd like to show you a quick video that will illustrate how ADS-B functions. Well, I thought I was going to show you a quick video. Let's try that. Okay.
Now, this was not covered under the ADS-B contract, was it?
It was not, and it's also not biting into my 5 minutes, so. We'll just move on if that's okay.
Very good.
Okay. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Petri, and members of the subcommittee. I am pleased to appear before you today to discuss the FAA's contract for Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast System, or ADS-B, the cornerstone of NextGen. As the Director of Surveillance and Broadcast Services in the Air Traffic Organization at the FAA, I have responsibility for oversight of this performance-based contract. ADS-B is a new service for the FAA and has the potential to transform the NAS. In order to develop this service, we have crafted an innovative and closely monitored contract with the ITT Corporation. We appreciate the role that Congress has already played in developing this contract. In fact, our confidence in this contract is directly due to Congress's oversight and input, as well as contributions from other government entities and participations by the gamut of other industry stakeholders, such as the pilots, the airliners, and the manufacturers, to name a few. We welcome the members' continued oversight to help us manage the contract moving forward. The ADS-B contract has scalability and flexibility, which leads to greater service availability in the NAS. ADS-B-equipped aircraft receive satellite signals and transmit the aircraft's precise locations to air traffic controllers and pilots. Both pilots and controllers will, for the first time, be able to see similar real-time displays of air traffic. Pilots will know with greater accuracy where their own aircraft are, and the displays will show them all in the aircraft in the air and on the ground around them. In addition to improved safety in the sky, ADS-B can help reduce the risk of runway incursions. Additionally, ADS-B has the capability of increasing efficiency and capacity in the NAS, which in turn helps to reduce the delay problem. With this technology, we will be able to provide services to the people and places that we never have before. The scalability of ADS-B allows us to adapt the technology for a variety of purposes. The contract also gives us greater flexibility because it allows us to deploy the technology more rapidly and more easily than we could have on our own and in areas where we have never had radar. General aviation pilots will have enhanced safety features in their cockpits. Pilots in Alaska will be able to navigate the rough terrain there more easily. Aircraft over the Gulf of Mexico will have greater flexibility to use different altitudes and have reduced separation minimums. With the greater coverage and accuracy of ADS-B, we'll be able to predict where aircraft are and will be, making the NAS that much more reliable. The contract requires ITT to have the system ready for use by 2010 and expand coverage nationwide by 2013. The first stage of the contract is worth $207 million, with options worth an additional $1.6 billion. With a system as important as ADS-B and the price tag that comes with it, we want to make sure that we are working responsibly with the taxpayers' dollars. We are keenly aware of the risks inherent to new technology and new procedures, and we are safeguarding against them as best as we can. ADS-B's potential is enormous. It is integral to our ability to achieve NextGen and to handle the tripling of today's air traffic predicted by 2025. But we do not want to oversell these capabilities. And the only way we can present a realistic picture of our goals is to double-check our accomplishments along the way. We have designed the contract to include several required milestone events that will help us track progress and test the system as each piece is completed. Further, we have created additional incentives and disincentives throughout the contract to maximize the contractor's commitment to success. Finally, we have a building block plan for the contract. First we build, then we test, while we create the appropriate procedures for use, and only after the groundwork has been laid do we deploy the technology nationwide. If the contractor is unable to achieve certain milestones, the FAA may consider it in default to the contract and may cancel the remainder of the contract. The first milestone is set for May 2008, when the contractor is to test the uplinking of traffic and weather information to pilots. With this aggressive timeline, we are not wasting any time in requiring our contractor to deliver. These milestones give us concrete measures of the contractor's progress and, if needed, allow the FAA to adjust the program early on or redirect resources as needed. Our goal is not only to test technical performance, but also to test business performance. We also have other oversight measures built into the contract, which include preliminary design reviews and critical design reviews that enable us to track the contractor's progress and success. We also have risk mitigation procedures in place, which require ITT to work with the FAA to resolve any issues that might arise in the course of the contract. Some of the major incentives for our contractor are embedded in the additional $1.6 billion options that the FAA can choose to exercise or not. Depending on proven contractor performance, or if the FAA does not receive the benefits anticipated in a particular area, these options would allow the FAA to unilaterally stop the contract in whole or in part. Additionally, the contractor is allowed, subject to FAA approval, to develop the data for other aeronautical uses, which would result in a reduction of the cost of the contract to the FAA while allowing the contractor to recoup its investments. We are confident that this system of carrots and sticks will afford the FAA considerable oversight of the contract, encourage the contractor to excel in performance, and allow seamless integration of this important new technology. FAA is a safety oversight agency first and foremost, and the certification of the data is critical to our mission to ensure safety is maintained and enhanced for the flying public. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my prepared statement. I would be happy to answer any questions that you or the other members of the committee may have.
Thank you, Mr. Capizzuto. The chair now recognizes the Inspector General, Mr. Scoville.
Chairman Costello, Ranking Member Petri, members of the subcommittee, we appreciate the opportunity to testify on the FAA's efforts to develop and deploy ADS-B. At the request of the chairman, we are examining the risks to this important effort and FAA's contracting approach. We recognize that ADS-B has enormous potential to enhance capacity, improve safety, and fundamentally change the way air traffic is managed. However, a full disclosure of costs, expected benefits, and risks is needed. This is a complex, long-term effort that requires significant investments from both government and airspace users. Given FAA's history with developing new technologies and its approach for ADS-B, we believe that an extraordinary level of oversight will be required. Today, I will discuss three major points. First, realistic expectations need to be set for the benefits ADS-B will deliver in terms of capacity and reducing delays. ADS-B will not provide near-term capacity benefits or relief from record-level delays at the nation's most congested airports. FAA's plans call for the ADS-B ground infrastructure to be in place by 2013, and airspace users are not expected to be equipped with new avionics until 2020. FAA does expect to see benefits in the 2009 timeframe in the Gulf of Mexico from ADS-B, where radar coverage is limited. We note that FAA intends to mandate ADS-B out, the broadcast of aircraft information to ground systems, but the majority of benefits rely on ADS-B in and the display of this information in the cockpit. However, costs and requirements for ADS-B in and cockpit displays, which could shift more responsibility to the pilot, are not well understood. We think FAA needs to provide Congress and stakeholders with a much clearer path for moving forward with ADS-B and realizing much-needed capacity improvements. Second, ADS-B has demonstrated important benefits in Alaska, where radar coverage is limited. However, ADS-B implementation in the continental United States, which involves supplementing and ultimately replacing radar, is a complex undertaking. The widespread introduction of ADS-B faces a number of risks. They include user acceptance, frequency congestion concerns, development and approval of procedures that can capitalize on ADS-B, and software modifications to existing controller displays and automation systems. All these risks could materially affect the cost, schedule, and expected benefits of ADS-B. Finally, FAA has decided to rely on a service contract approach for ADS-B. This means that the government will not own the ground infrastructure, but will pay for broadcast services. A heretofore unseen level of FAA contract oversight will be needed. Over the years, we have documented numerous problems with FAA's major acquisitions that resulted in million-dollar cost increases and schedule slips measured in years. Problems are directly traceable to, among other things, poor contract oversight. FAA has never before relied on a service contract to introduce a revolutionary technology into the NAS. As we testified last week, the experiences with flight service stations underscore the importance of strong oversight of contractor efforts. Important lessons learned focus on greater insight into contractor efforts and how problems are solved. The stakes are much higher with ADS-B, and the need for oversight greatly amplified. To FAA's credit, the agency intends to use several controls to help manage the contract, including techniques for measuring cost and schedule changes and performance metrics. However, these controls are not fully in place. Once established, FAA must execute them properly and hold the contractor accountable. An important oversight mechanism is the establishment of a performance control board. This board, comprised of FAA and contractor personnel, is expected to monitor ADS-B performance, review changes to the system, and mutually resolve disagreements, all very important responsibilities. This board is not yet in place, and its charter is not finalized. The overall comfort level with FAA's approach will increase only when this board is firmly established and roles and responsibilities clearly defined. Key watch items for FAA oversight going forward include managing requirements and having the right in-house expertise and skill mix for effective management and oversight. It cannot be business as usual with ADS-B. A different model of oversight is needed. The air traffic organization must shift its role from providing a service to maintaining direct, sustained oversight. We are concerned that FAA could find itself in a situation where it knows little about the system that is expected to be the foundation of NextGen. FAA must take steps to ensure it effectively addresses this risk. This concludes my statement, Mr. Chairman. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you or other members of the subcommittee might have.
The chair thanks you, Mr. Scoville, and now recognizes for 5 minutes to summarize his testimony, Mr. Kefalotis.
Thank you, Chairman. ITT wishes to thank the committee for the opportunity to testify about ADS-B.
Can I ask you to move the microphone closer, please? Thank you.
A vital program which is an essential building block of the next generation air transportation system. We recognize the critical role of the committee in exercising program oversight and in authorizing the necessary taxpayer dollars to make the program viable. ITT, along with our teammates, is honored to have been selected to be the FAA's partner in the ADS-B program, and through this program to serve the nation's air traffic control needs. ITT believes the FAA is to be commended for the efficient and professional manner in which this procurement was conducted. Salient elements of the FAA's procurement process were open and frequent communications with industry, adherence to the process and schedule promulgated early in procurement activities, and an effective statement of government requirements. ITT believes the contracting approach developed by the government strikes a proper balance between allowing contractor efficiency and providing solid means for the FAA oversight and control of ITT activity. Notably, the contract provides a period and processes to ensure that the developed service fully meets defined requirements to include safety, security, and radio frequency spectrum constraints, allows for continuous government monitoring of the deployed service, and provides significant financial incentives for contractor team performance. Finally, an FAA-defined performance control board allows continuous involvement of the FAA in system development, deployment, and operation. The contracting approach has also provided a mechanism to ensure the continuity of the service for which ADS-B assets are deployed. The FAA required vendors to submit succession plans as a part of their proposals. ITT's plan appoints AT&T a successor for the very unlikely contingency of a triggering event. In closing, I would like to reiterate that ITT is proud to have been chosen to be the FAA's partner in this vital initiative, and state that ITT and its contractor team are fully committed to the success of this program. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you today. I would be pleased to respond to any questions you may have.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Dr. Sinha.
Good afternoon, Chairman Costello, Congressman Petri, and members of the subcommittee. ADS-B is a well-defined, tested, and globally accepted system concept for air traffic control surveillance. Although first made operational in the United States, specifically in Alaska, ADS-B now is being accepted and introduced around the world for ATC applications. It is used for tracking aircraft both while in flight and on the airport surface. Aircraft pilots and ground vehicle drivers also use ADS-B to monitor positions and velocities of other aircraft and ground vehicles. ADS-B provides highly accurate, plus or minus 3 feet position of aircraft, faster update 1 second for better tracking, speed and direction data of the aircraft and the ground vehicles. In addition, ADS-B ground stations can be sited and installed more easily than radars, permitting aircraft surveillance in heretofore inaccessible geographic locations such as the Gulf of Mexico and Alaska. There are two fundamentally distinct types of ADS-B avionics configurations, commonly known as ADS-B out and ADS-B in. With ADS-B out, an aircraft or ground vehicle transmits ADS-B reports but does not receive reports from other ADS-B sources. With ADS-B in, they can not only transmit reports but also receive reports from other aircraft, ground vehicles, or ADS-B ground stations. These reports can include graphical and textual weather information as well as other flight information such as pilot reports and notice to airmen. The improved surveillance, accuracy, integrity, latency, and availability made possible by ADS-B will enable reduced aircraft separation standards to improve NAS capacity, comprehensive tracking of aircraft and vehicles operating in the air and on the airport surface to improve safety, security, and operational effectiveness, improved access to underutilized airspace and airports, improved four-dimensional trajectory information for better gate-to-gate aircraft operating efficiency and flight path conformance monitoring, flexible assignment of responsibilities on the ground and to the cockpit as needed to support distributed decision-making and workload balancing, adaptive flexible spacing and sequencing of aircraft, improved collaborative air traffic management among flight and airport operators, service providers, and other stakeholders. Add to these improvements the reduced weather impacts to traffic flow and airport access made possible by the use of an accurate weather picture and other advisory information. We can see that ADS-B is an enabler of several key next-gen capabilities. However, the extent of ADS-B benefits mentioned earlier will vary depending on the environment, whether it is radar or non-radar, and the aircraft equipage, ADS-B out or ADS-B in, and how many aircraft are equipped. Additional ADS-B benefits are possible based on new concepts in varying stage of explorations, such as improved approach of operations in instrument conditions due to the ability to electronically see proximate aircraft. This can help us include the capacity by paired approaches to closely spaced parallel runways, as well as independent approaches to parallel runways down to 2,500 feet. Improved departure operations in the most congested terminal areas by reductions in departure spacing afforded through delegation to flight crews. Improved safety in the air through enhancements to onboard collision avoidance systems, on the airport surface through direct cockpit warnings of potential conflicting traffic. Reduced controller workload through more equitable sharing of spacing and separation assurance responsibilities between ATC and pilots. In closing, let me summarize my main messages. ADS-B is a well-defined, tested, and globally accepted surveillance technology that provides better performance than legacy technologies. ADS-B offers benefits from both mandated ADS-B out and voluntary ADS-B in capabilities, and they accrue to both the FAA and NAS users. The timely realization of ADS-B benefits is dependent on achieving appropriate ground automation system upgrades. This is beyond the ADS-B system, other ground automation systems like ERAM, avionics equipage, and operational procedures. ADS-B is a cornerstone capability for NextGen, as several of the key NextGen operational improvements require it. It is imperative that ADS-B associated research and program implementation, as well as the other NAS systems it leverages, be managed closely so that the full set of projected benefits can be achieved. Mr. Chairman, this concludes my testimony. I would be happy to answer any questions the committee may have.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Brantley.
Chairman Costello, Congressman Petri, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting PASS to testify on the ADS-B contract. PASS represents more than 11,000 FAA employees throughout the United States and overseas, including the employees who install, repair, and certify the systems making up our air traffic control system. When fully implemented, ADS-B can be a useful tool for pilots and air traffic controllers to use in maintaining proper separation of aircraft while allowing more efficient use of our nation's airways. PASS and the employees we represent welcome this advancement in air traffic control technology, but we will not give up our focus on safety in all modernization efforts. It is our understanding that the FAA plans that ADS-B, unlike our current radar systems, will not be properly certified, and all maintenance will be the responsibility of the contractor. Certification is the process in which a certificated FAA technician checks and tests systems or equipment periodically to ensure that the systems or equipment can safely remain in service and provide the advertised service while not negatively impacting any aspect of the NAS. Certification is also performed before returning a repaired system to service. The FAA's own orders label certification as an inherently governmental function, and as such, it can only be accomplished by FAA employees. For decades, all NAS systems and services directly affecting the flying public were required to be certified. However, shortly after the ADS-B contract was awarded, the FAA made changes to its time-tested certification program. In its update to the maintenance handbook effective October 1st, 2007, the FAA changed the order so that only FAA-owned systems can be certified. In other words, the FAA has not only changed the criteria to allow ADS-B to be deployed without requiring certification, but actually went so far as to prohibit full and appropriate certification of all systems it does not own. PASS has learned that the FAA intends to perform what it is calling service certification on ADS-B, which would allow the FAA to certify the service based on users telling the agency that the service works. In other words, the controllers will have to rely on the users, pilots, and vendors to tell the FAA that there is a problem. There will be no internal FAA quality checks as there are today. PASS is certain that ADS-B must be fully and appropriately certified to ensure its safe operation. In the opinion of the experts, FAA technicians in the field, with the complete elimination of system certification for systems not owned by the FAA, there will be no way to independently determine if the system is safe. It should also be noted that this new interpretation of the agency's certification criteria would apply not only to ADS-B, but also to any system or service that is not owned by the FAA. Any future contract awarded by the agency that provides for vendor-owned equipment or services would be barred from the FAA certification program. The NAS is not just one piece of equipment. but rather a complex, integrated system that includes thousands of distinct, smaller systems, all of which interface with one another, and aviation safety depends on oversight of the entire system. FAA employees are the only people anywhere with such a detailed knowledge of the intricacies associated with NAS systems and operations. Placing responsibility for a system as vital to air travel as ADS-B entirely in the hands of the private sector threatens the safety of the flying public. Furthermore, in order to have sufficient redundancy to avoid service interruptions, there also must be employees present who fully understand the different types of service. Since ADS-B will be an entirely vendor-run operation, the agency will be held hostage to the vendor's response time, which will at the very least result in longer delays and will leave the FAA with no in-house capability should the vendor fail to live up to the contract. PASS strongly supports modernization of the NAS, but never in a manner that compromises the very foundation of safety upon which our current system is based. PASS asks that Congress direct the FAA to fully and appropriately certify all NAS systems and services, including ADS-B, that meet the criteria for certification as defined by the agency prior to October 1st, 2007, without regard for ownership of such systems and services. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would entertain any questions that anyone may have.
I thank you, Mr. Brantley. Mr. Scoville, in my opening statement, I raised concerns, as you did, with the issue of raising unrealistic expectations on the part of the administration. And I'm not here today to beat up on the administration. I support ADS-B. I think we're moving in the right direction. But when the administration came out with their budget proposal on February the 14th, and throughout the process until we passed the House bill, the message to the American public and to the Congress was pass our budget proposal because we have to move forward with NextGen. And as we went through the busiest season that we have seen in recent history this summer and had unprecedented delays in cancellations, the people kept hearing, well, we need NextGen. And it was like we're going to go down to Target or Walmart or someplace and buy something off the shelf, plug it in, and our problems are going away. One, you raised the same issue in your statement, that we need to be realistic as to what NextGen can deliver in terms of delays and capacity and so on. And I wonder if you might elaborate on your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You mentioned the term realistic expectations, and we would certainly second the use of that term. As you and other members of the subcommittee have noted, ADS-B will have no impact on delays at the nation's busiest airports in the near term. As Mr. Capizzuto and others have stated today, the contract between FAA and ITT calls for installation of the ground infrastructure by the year 2013. FAA has mandated or proposes to mandate the initiation of ADS-B out aboard user aircraft not until the year 2020. Clearly, that's a long time from where we stand today in late 2007. I should also note, however, that ADS-B out, which is the initial part of the system that will be implemented, does not propose to have the promise to address congestion and delays at the nation's busiest airports, because it's only the second part of the ADS-B system, the ADS-B in system, that will allow aircraft and other users conceivably to reduce separation standards and increase capacity. So we would urge caution on the part of the committee and other members of the aviation industry and the traveling public before they invest too much unrealistic expectations in ADS-B itself.
I also noted in your statement, and I think Mr. Brantley as well, and I'll ask you, Mr. Brantley, to comment on this. One is that you are concerned that the FAA may find itself in a situation where ITT knows a lot about the system and the FAA knows very little about the system. And I made note of in my opening statement that we're all aware that under the contract that the ITT will build, own, and operate the system and will have a contractual arrangement where they'll actually purchase for transition. And I just wonder if you will elaborate, Mr. Brantley, as well, your concerns about the FAA at some point knowing very little about this new system and ITT folks knowing a lot about it, which might imply to some that ITT would have a monopoly on this system.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. We should note that our assessment at this time indicates that FAA has negotiated a very robust and aggressive contract with ITT. It's been successful in that regard. The skill set that it brought to the contracting process up to this point has given it this enviable position. The contract as it goes forward, however, will unroll in a series of phases. And certainly the initial phase between now and 2013 presents the need for FAA to have a skill set. As ADS-B out unrolls to 2020, perhaps a different skill set will be needed. And certainly with the advent of ADS-B in and full implementation throughout the NAS of ADS-B's capabilities, yet another skill set may be needed. Given the length of time between 2007 and when full ADS-B capabilities may be realized, 2020 or in the years immediately following that, skills currently available in FAA may move out, they may retire, they'll move on. Certainly, FAA will be challenged at each step along the way to acquire the skills that will be necessary to give it the robust contractual oversight capability that it will need. Currently, we see going forward, and this would be for the immediate future, a skill set would be needed along these lines: telecommunications expertise, signals processing, systems engineering and integration, and finally, when we're talking about user involvement and potentially the use of pilots and human factors needed in order to fully implement ADS-B, FAA will need to have expertise in that area in order to ensure that the contract can be properly executed.
Mr. Brantley, would you briefly follow with your concerns?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. In addition to what Mr. Scoville said, and I do agree with his assessment on the assumption that everything works well and the vendor remains in place, my concern is, however unlikely or remote the chance, if the agency found itself in a position where it had to take over the ground stations, either the vendor defaulted, the agency decided that they weren't performing and then they canceled the contract, or whatever the case, the agency would not have the in-house capability to do so. So at that point, they would no longer have a choice. They would be essentially stuck, even if they felt that the vendor couldn't perform.
Mr. Capizzuto, would you like to respond to the concerns expressed by Mr. Scoville and Mr. Brantley on that issue?
Yes, sir. Thank you. As I understand it, I just want to point out that the contract as let to ITT is really a sub-element of a full system. As was mentioned by Mr. Scoville, that the avionics is the driving force behind this. And so it's really about having the aircraft with the proper avionics, and that's where the accuracy and integrity information is actually collected. So this is the inverse of looking at radar, where radar derives the information. Now the information comes from GPS and avionics. That information is transferred to the ITT sub-element, and which is then brought to our service delivery points, where the FAA is playing the systems integrator. Our role is to pull this together, collect the data, submit that data to our regulator to get approval to use it for air traffic controllers to separate air traffic with. And to do any of this, we are governed by our safety management system, and that's first and foremost to us. So whenever we build a system, we're governed by the safety management system, and we put the proper controls in place.
What does that mean, the proper controls in place?
When the way this contract was developed, we have 3 years to develop it co-jointly with ITT. I know we call it a service contract, but we're actually going through design reviews with them. We have designed the performance specifications and provided it to them. We're doing the oversight as they develop the system so that we build in security and safety up front. After the deployment of this, we will have the capability to recognize what that proper data is at the service delivery point, and these are quantified requirements, things like availability or latency. These are things that can be measured, and you use those for certification of that information.
So those who may be concerned, as Mr. Scoville just mentioned and Mr. Brantley, about turnover as time goes on, you have no concerns about that?
I think the other piece that's missing in this conversation is that the radar that we're going to keep in there is the backup. As part of this investment, we're only really removing 50% of our secondary surveillance radars, which essentially are overlapped right now and not being used as a redundant function. So what we're doing is slimming down our particular inventory of secondary surveillance radars, but we have two things going for us. One, we're keeping all the primary radars, and we're keeping 50% of the secondary surveillance radars in our inventory as the capability of a backup. But then additionally, we have in the specification in the contract that the provider has to have independent validation of the information that's coming from ADS-B or the avionics. So in all cases, we have the capability. And then finally, as we do today, we have procedural backups.
We have other members here who have questions. I have a final question, and then I'll come back. I do have a few others. Mr. Brantley, you talked about the certification process and that the FAA came back and changed it. Wonder if you might elaborate on the current system as far as certification is concerned versus what the FAA has proposed or what the change has done.
Certainly. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Currently, any system, there are several criteria, but the two main ones, any system that's providing real-time positional information or that's providing data that's used by pilots or air traffic controllers that's going to affect what a plane does. Anything that meets those criteria has to be certified. Now, that had no restrictions based on it, depending on who owned the system or service. However, the change that the agency made seems specifically targeted, at least in part, to allow the approach the agency has chosen to take with ADS-B. I think it would be hard to argue that ADS-B won't meet that criteria. It may be a matter of time. The argument may be over when it meets the criteria, but it will. So I think that's at least part of what's driving it. I think also we need to keep in mind, while the agency talks about verifying or certifying the data, that's one step in certifying a system or service today. There are many other things that are checked. There are tests run on the systems themselves. There are system parameters checked. There are interfaces with other systems. So it's not just the data that comes out the end that's checked to certify something today. And apparently the approach that's going to be taken here is the agency will verify just the data. And based on that, without having any knowledge of what's going on with the system itself, they'll certify the service.
The chair now recognizes the ranking member, Mr. Petri.
Thank you very much. It's fascinating. I wonder if maybe you, Mr. Capizzuto, or one of the other panel members could discuss this from the point of view of not of the FAA or the contractors, but from the point of view of the pilot or the airline companies and the users. How is this? They have to make expenditures and buy some equipment or rent it, or at what stage is it going to make sense for them to do it if there's a dual system out there and we're phasing this in? How is this really going to? Could you discuss that? Is there a plan? Or I'm thinking in my back of my mind, we're going to digital TV, and everyone's sitting out there. They're going to send coupons eventually to people to equip it. Maybe it's different than that. Or maybe the pilots and the industry's already way ahead of the government, and they've got the stuff in their boxes already. But could you discuss how the two things are going to work together a little?
Let me start by saying that ADS-B has been in the agency's research and development area for probably 9 years. The cargo airline industry, a series of other airlines Pioneer Airlines have basically participated in the development and test and demonstration of this technology over those 9 years. We have essentially accelerated this or moved to the next phase of implementation based on those successes, both up in Alaska and right here in the Ohio River Valley. So there were a lot of demonstrations that proved where the technology was. We are essentially right now working on what's called an Air Traffic Management Advisory Council. We have an ADS-B work group where I have access to the aviation industry as the customer of the NAS, where they understand, the development of the strategy of this program, where we discuss some of the issues, such as the backup analysis, which was done in concert with the aviation industry, so they understood what we were delivering and what the decision meant. In fact, they also participated in the development of the business case that we put forward to go through the investment analysis that concluded in awarding this contract. So I would say that the industry has been involved. I think what we recently charted this summer was an aviation rulemaking committee as part of doing the notice of proposed rulemaking. Again, many of the same members from the ATMAC ADS-B work group are involved, but now it was expanded even further. And in that group, we're essentially we're charted with our first deliverable, which was a report to talk about how can you early incentivize the operators such that they wouldn't wait till 2018 or 2019 to comply to the 2020 rule. And in that report, which is now out on the web, it represented the aviation industry's desire to see incentives, either in the form of manufacturers being provided incentives or tax rebates so they could lower the cost of ADS-B, and likely that would increase equipage at an earlier rate and at a higher magnitude, and then also to look at the incentives for the airlines in such a way that they would also be incentivized to acquire ADS-B at an earlier state. And just one other thing to point out is we're working also with our international partners. So in Canada, they're deploying ADS-B in the Hudson Bay. In Australia, they're using ADS-B right now to separate air traffic in the en route or high altitude. And Europe currently has a program under César, or Cascade is the name of the program, in which they're looking to develop pioneer programs and move forward with this. So we're working in concert with the rest of the world so that we globally can implement this properly.
So, so the international carriers, there'll be continuity. So when they fly from one airspace to another, it'll all be one. It'll be compatible or the same system.
Yes, sir. We've been working closely with them to ensure that we have total global interoperability.
How much, do you have an idea of what kind of investment we're talking for different categories of plane users? I mean,
yes, sir. If you're talking about the total cost, as you're calling it, for the user, it's on approximately $6.9 billion. And that captures the 210,000 aircraft we talked. Most of the 200,000 are general aviation, and you're looking at about 10,000 air transport category.
So if a person is buying a Piper, well, probably not a Piper Club, they wouldn't participate in this necessarily. They'd use a smaller. But so, if you're buying one of these corporate jets, how much would that cost,
the price varies as a function of if you're buying a brand new corporate jet and it already has a multifunction type display, already has GPS on board. So you can see prices for the general aviation community. It ranges from $10,000 to $15,000. When you're looking at the air transport, it's upwards of $40,000, $50,000, and it can go upwards of $160,000. It depends on the vintage of the aircraft, and if you're doing retrofits versus it coming off the assembly line as a forward fit, then you really get a huge reduction in the cost. So, but those just give you the prices I were giving you were the capture, acquire, acquisition cost, and then implementation of it into your aircraft.
So the new planes are already having it, or it's in the drawing boards?
Well, so by putting out the notice of proposed rulemaking, what we've done is sent a strong signal of what the standards are for the development of what ADS-B out is. What has been going on are some of the some of the manufacturers have been going on risk and building it into the system. And so today there are aircraft with ADS-B in it, and Europe as well has enforced this through some of their rules. And so what's happening is people are deploying with a version of the standard. What we just did by putting out the notice of proposed rulemaking is we clarified what version of the standard we're interested in the FAA.
Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
The chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Salazar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I had the same concerns as Mr. Petri had. You know, most of us that own small planes outfit them with a 430 Garmin. Is that going to be usable in this case? I mean, would it be part of the system, or are we going to have to scrap that and toss it out and put something else into our airplane? Mr. Caputo?
I understand your concern, sir. I mean, what we're looking at right now are the aviation manufacturers are looking to combine the avionics so that if you have a current mode AC type transponder, what you can do is have it, you can remove that and replace it with a unit that does the same function as well as ADS-B. So right now, Garmin does produce a system that's available, and it is ADS-B capable, and it also, that's what they're using up in Alaska right now, and it's very successful.
So if someone isn't equipped with this equipment, he won't be allowed to fly into certain airspaces. Is that correct?
Correct. The rule is an airspace rule. It goes into, if we move forward with this, it would go into effect in 2010. You would have to comply by 2020. So essentially, you're operating up till 2020 without it, or if you choose to equip early. And if you mentioned that we would be deploying ADS-B ground infrastructure by 2013, as part of that infrastructure, we would be providing an uplink capability, which essentially will allow weather to be viewed in the cockpit. And so we were looking at that as one of the ways to incentivize the general aviation community such that they can acquire weather in the cockpit. They would buy the ADS-B equipment.
Okay, thank you. And I have a question that Dr. Kagan wanted to ask. I hope I can read his writing here. Privatization of essential safety-oriented programs does not allow for our government to walk away from its responsibilities. How will the FAA control a private corporation without owning it? Mr. Scoble, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, sir. Let me give it a try. FAA will, as I understand the question, how will FAA control a private organization, a private company? Through the contract mechanism, and our review indicates to date that FAA has negotiated a robust contract. Through controls in that contract, FAA will attempt to control the performance and cost and schedule metrics. It's indicated that it will require ITT to use the Earned Value Management System, which is a process developed by DoD to keep contracts on schedule and on budget. Perhaps most important, FAA indicates that it, along with ITT, will comprise a performance control board, which will monitor progress and evaluate effectiveness of execution of the contract as it goes along. If I can borrow Mr. Hayes's term for myself as the paid skeptic, we think at this point that all of those are to be commended, and we want to give due credit to FAA for inserting in the contract at this point those controls. If we have skepticism, it's due to the need to see proper execution and management of that contract as we go forward. We stand right now really at the starting line. Much needs to be done very, very quickly, even in the next few months. So we'll have a track record built very soon, and at that point, we and you should be able to reach a preliminary opinion, at least as to FAA's success on contract execution.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I hope you took my comment as a compliment, Mr. Scoble, because we need some skeptics around here when government's at work. Several questions here. Benny, you can do a 7-minute statement in 5 minutes. So when you and I first met, I had to get you to talk Southern and slow you down. I did the math, and just so people understand, in my basic math, you could equip every one of those airplanes today for $1,260,000,000. Now, that's oversimplification, but the point is the technology, given the competition and the desire on the part of the aviation community to use it, because it's a tool that makes them safer, saves them fuel, all kinds of things, is the key, Mr. Salazar and my friend Leonard and others, to getting this thing done. We got to reverse the role of government. You've kind of done it by the way you've done this very innovative contract. And Mr. Kefalotis, we're really depending on you to demonstrate how well private industry can mesh with government. as we've done with the RCI program for military housing. It can be done and should be done. Having said all that, we're going to reverse it now. It's not the government. It's mandating you do something. The government has come up with a way to do something that's so much better. People need to be lining up to get it like they did for an iPhone at 4 o'clock in the morning. But we've gone from NDBs and ADFs, which are just way needle ball and airspeed, to something that is incredibly easy to use, incredibly accurate. And Mr. Brantley has very good foresight into what we're doing here, and we're certainly not ignoring him, but I would ask FAA and PASS, a very important relationship there, to make sure that everybody understands what's going on. Let me get over here to a question before my time runs out. When we first started talking about this, my greatest criticism of the FAA is they came in selling the price, not the product. Finally figured out what the product was. I've been to Alaska twice, flown with it, been to China. A couple guys, Navy pilot, 2 former FAA employees, are building a system, selling it, installing it, and maintaining it in China out of their hangar, which is about like a garage. So the simplicity and the effectiveness is there. It's proven. It's not something that just appeared today. Those are the things that give me reason to be encouraged, enthusiastic, and optimistic if we can look into the future. Benny talked about the Mode C transponders. Can you update folks on where we are now? When we first started, you had to have a box put in the plane. But 6 months ago, that was the box. Now the box is integrated into transponder. What do you see as the potential for the industry to bring in new technology, smaller, lighter, less expensive? Give us a peek into that.
I think this is exciting for the manufacturing industry, and they've been waiting for us to send that signal of we're moving forward with this. And the contract award and the NPRM is certainly 2 strong signals to them. In fact, I just briefed the GA Manufacturing Association last week, and in there we're basically opening up the doors and allowing them to see what this contract's about. But I'll tell you, there was a proposal. As part of the proposal process, ITT offered to spend corporate dollars, not out of our contract, but they will provide us insight, and they will, at the Performance Control Board, provide us with status on how they're doing with this. And what they've done is partnered through their memorandum of agreements with avionics manufacturers. And essentially what they realize that the worth of this contract is tied to avionics and people equipping early. And so to do that, they're investing their own dollars in the development of a joint avionics package that basically combines ADS-B with the current Mode AC transponders. Therefore, it now allows these new radios to replace your old radios, be interoperable with TCAS, Traffic Collision Avoidance System, and be interoperable with our radar as we go through the transition point. I think those are innovations that we'll see other avionics manufacturers jump on. And
let me cut you off just a minute before my time runs off. Bring Mr. Kefalotis in. Speak to Mr. Brantley's concerns and Mr. Scoville's, and also to the issue of what is in this for private industry in terms of the incentives for being really successful in the new equipment and processes that can be developed out of this.
Congressman Hayes, on our side, we are installing a highly robust, redundant architecture, a highly reliable system. The government has, I think, as another innovation, specified technical performance measures against which the government will judge the quality of the service we provide. We, ITT, have instrumented our system such that those technical performance measures will be constantly monitored. We will provide data to the government so that to the FAA through an interface, so the FAA can also constantly monitor our performance parameters. We have proposed, and the government has accepted, an aggressive financial incentives penalties clause in the operational phase, such that if we deliver services that do not meet the technical performance standards defined in a contract, we suffer pretty significant financial penalties. So in terms of what the contract has done and what we plan on deploying, we're deploying a highly robust, scalable, safe, and secure architecture that will meet the government's needs. In regard to certification, the FAA has specified, and again, we are independently instrumenting our system and will constantly monitor the technical performance of our system. the government has required us to independently deliver to a service, to a certification server in FAA premises, data relevant to the performance of our system with which the government can independently evaluate and monitor our performance and certify data. So we feel very good about what we're doing, and we think the government has done a very good job of ensuring that they can monitor us. We believe significantly in ADS-B technology. We believe it will deliver significant benefit to the flying public and promises a potential for eventually dramatically enhancing the capabilities of the national airspace system.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, maybe we get another crack at it.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Washington, Mr. Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Kefalotis, under the contract that ITT has with the FAA, is there an anticipation in the use of the GPS system of the current system, or are you anticipating changes made to the GPS system to increase that will increase the capacity of the GPS system? Right now, we're going through an Armed Services Committee. We're struggling with, do we go to 3F or stick with what we have? And so I'm wondering what's your assumption about the capacity that ADS-B will use of the GPS system, and what's your assumption about the future of the GPS system and increased capacity within it?
Our design for the ground infrastructure takes advantage of airborne GPS receivers and the data linking of position data from aircraft to our ground system. So in that sense, and just as an adjunct, the navigation system on board doesn't have to be GPS. It just has to be a navigation system that meets performance requirements. But that said, GPS is the system that will meet performance requirements, and a robust GPS network is essential to successful operation of the system.
I would agree with that statement. My question is the assumption that the contract makes about the available capacity as we roll out ADS-B and the use of GPS.
Congressman, I apologize. I'm not sure I understand the question. In terms of the number of satellites in the constellation and the robustness of the GPS constellation?
Yeah.
Our contract assumes the baseline GPS constellation. The rulemaking requires a navigational accuracy for position parameter that's quite stringent, and a robust constellation will dramatically aid in achieving that parameter.
Okay, well, this is an important question because we're walking through this in the Armed Services Committee as well. Mr. Capizzuto, other than, what incentives do either GA pilots or transport airlines have to install the avionics between 013 and 020, or between now and 020, other than that they damn well better?
Okay, so again, working closely with the aviation community, there's a recognition that we believe that there will be some benefits essentially to the operations of the NAS, which translates into their operational capabilities. When we did the business case for this, it identifies pretty deep benefit pools in certain areas, and some of them are really ADS-B out only, which I could say is in the economic analysis component of the notice of proposed rulemaking. Essentially, the translation of air traffic control efficiencies is a function of having higher accurate information or higher update information. Translates into less deviations, which again is fuel savings, and that is a pretty big thing. But it also translates into emissions as well. So when you look at the concept of emissions, noise, and fuel savings, we make a pretty good, robust case for just ADS-B out. Certainly in the en route environment, high altitude airspace, and some in the terminal environment. And then in the non-radar airspace is really where we get to see some of those benefits earlier, such as the Gulf of Mexico, Alaska, and Colorado. Those are prime areas where we could exploit this in earlier on. And fundamentally, putting this building block in place allows us to have a stable baseline to build ADS-B in. And that's the key to the NextGen.
Sure. Is FAA planning then planning on proposing any specific set of incentives to enhance the deployability of ADS-B-N? Get them all right here. Yeah.
Yes, and the example I'll use would be in Alaska. I mean, in our business case, we've outlined where you'll have better access to certain airports. This is not just about ADS-B. We're also providing weather at the destination airport. In some cases in the Gulf of Mexico, we're putting in surveillance, communications, and weather. So it's a full service provision delivered to Houston Center. And in that case, we're able to develop new routes. We're calling them performance routes.
Sure. So what kind of discussions have you had with larger aircraft regarding the sorry, I'm getting distracted by the vote call. What specific conversations have you had with larger aircraft producers like the Boeings of the world about retrofitting, as well as discussions about putting them in on the front end?
Yeah, we've had some very robust discussions with Boeing and Airbus. We've been involved with the manufacturers of the actual equipment, like Rockwell Collins.
Can you give us a flavor of the content of those discussions?
Sure. They're members of this ATMAC, Air Traffic Management Advisory Council, ADS-B work group. You know, we essentially have been developing the strategy for execution for the last 16 months. In those discussions, it's the challenge between what's out there today. Can you use what's out there today? As I indicated earlier, people have been deploying ADS-B to a lesser standard. And the question is, in the time frame over the next 10 years, are there things we can do with that to continue leveraging off the ADS-B traction, if you want to call it that? But essentially, we were able to acquire those costs and embed them into the economic analysis, both for the business case and the NPRM. So we've worked closely with the industry to make sure that we have certainty around the numbers that you see. And so therefore, you're looking at what I would say is a very strong business case in the sense that we believe the data that's in there. The return on investment time frame is a little scary when you look at it, but this is a building block. And it's an infrastructure improvement, and those have long returns on investment. But essentially, we're not taking credit for all of the future capabilities that are out there either, and that's really the place that we want to explore.
I enjoy exploring that with Mr. Scoville when I have another 5 minutes. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman, and the chair will announce that we have 2 votes on the floor. We have about 13 minutes left. So at this time, I will recognize Mr. Duncan from Tennessee. After his questioning is over, then we will recess, go to the floor, vote, and be back in approximately 30 minutes. So we would ask the witnesses to stay if you would. And we have a round of, at least one other round of questions. Mr. Duncan's recognized.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't believe I'm going to have enough time to really get into this, so maybe I can come back and do this, but I'll start with this. Mr. Capizzuto, I don't think there's anybody in the Congress, even the pilots, who have the details or maybe even the capability to really do the rigorous analysis of this deal that we have to hope that your team has done. So we have to rely on you, but in hopes that maybe I can understand it a little bit better. It says in one of our papers on this, the total value of the contract, which has a number of options extending through 2025, is $1.86 billion. Segment 1 is a $207 million cost plus incentive fee contract. Can you tell me, is $207 million, is that the maximum cost of segment 1, or will the incentives add a lot of money to that? I'm not really clear from that sentence.
Sure. That 207 represents a target fee of 8% that's included in that number. So I just want to point out this is a cost plus incentive fee with a cost share clause as well. So if they overrun, not only does the fee go down, and it can go as low as 4%, but they will also start playing and paying for the cost overrun as well.
In your team's analysis of this, how much markup or how much profit do you think is in there for this? I've never seen a team quite this elaborate involving this many big companies and so forth. And anyway,
that fee translates to $15 million out of $207 million.
$15 million, and yes, is that pretty consistent through the remaining $1.86 billion? Would you say, or?
No, so we broke this up into like a hybrid set of contracts. What you have for the first one is a cost-plus incentive fee with the cost share because it's a development contract, and so there is some risk there, and we want to make sure we design in the safety and security we mentioned earlier. So we participate in that. All the other deliverables are firm fixed price, and they're pre-negotiated, and they're in the contract now.
Then I'm also curious, as you know, it says the total value of the contract is $1.86 billion, yet we're talking about a contract that extends to 2025. Now, in the STARS program and some of these programs in the past, we've had huge cost overruns. Now, how do you go about, how did you analyze it? Because we don't really know where we're going to be in 2020 financially. I mean, we don't know what inflation's going to happen, going to have occurred in all that time. What's gone into that? How did you arrive at that 1.86 billion? And is maybe I just better come back for this.
We have a little over 9 minutes left.
Okay.
So if you want to take.
Well, go ahead. You see what I'm getting at, I think.
I do. So essentially what we do is we negotiate with the vendor, and we look at their outlay versus what we had done in our independent government cost estimate. We negotiate those prices. We set up option breakpoints, so this subscription charges that they would be applying to us is on an annual basis. And essentially what we do is we would be paying them on an annual basis once we prove the design works. And just to point out, the FAA would own the paper design of this system. So at the end of the day, the configuration of that system is ours. We manage it. As we move forward, we essentially would be turning on service volumes. So we're buying this like you buy cable TV or cell phone. You're turning on service volumes, and once you turn them on, you pay annual prices on it. And what we do is we have breakpoints. At 2016 is a decision point on whether or not we continue paying those subscriptions for all the service volumes, because they should all be turned on. And then another breakpoint at 2021.
How confident are you that by the year 2025 we will have spent no more than $1.86 billion on this contract?
Well, the reason we have a lot of confidence in this is we built in penalties as well. So it's, it's a function of them delivering the service as we measure it.
Let me ask one more quick question. We read all the time that in these defense contractors, they hire all the retired admirals and generals, and then, boy, they get just exorbitant, whopping profits in almost all these big defense contracts. And Mr. Scoville, have you ever looked into how many former FAA employees are, or would you look into that sometime and see how many are working for these companies that are involved in these contracts? I think it'd be something interesting for you to look at sometime. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman, and at this time the subcommittee will stand in recess for 30 minutes. We would ask the witnesses to be back at the table. We do have 3 votes now. It was 2 votes a minute ago. Now it's 3, so it's about 30 minutes. The subcommittee stands in recess.